inscribed in the archives of eternity. He chose to return, and so the fire-folded gates opened once more, the glass river carried him down, and the mountains grew from shadows into stone. When his feet touched the dust again, the air seemed heavier, the light dimmer, but in his heart, the rhythm of the heavens still pulsed. Those who saw him said he had changed, that his eyes held a distance, as if they looked through the world rather than at it. And though he spoke what he had been shown, he knew that much would be lost in the telling, for no tongue could carry the weight of the place he had stood. Even now,
Enoch,
the fragments of his visions remain, scattered through scrolls and stones in the myths of peoples who never knew his name. And somewhere, beyond the reach of time, the scribe of righteousness still walks with the one who called him upward, waiting, watching, until the seals break and the great clock strikes its last hour. It is said that in the courts of heaven, there is no such thing as time as we know it. And yet, there comes a moment when the sands, whatever form they take in eternity, run out. For the watchers, that moment had arrived. Once, they had descended with the brilliance of morning stars, their voices carrying the harmony of the upper realms. They had walked among men, taught the secrets of the heavens, shared the crafts of metal, the weaving of colors, the shaping of words. But in doing so, they had crossed a boundary that was not theirs to cross. They had taken daughters of men, and in their mingling, they had birthed the giants, the Nephilim, whose appetites and violence bled the earth dry. Enoch, chosen as their mediator, had already carried their pleas into the presence of the Most High. They had hoped, perhaps, that mercy might bend the decrees of heaven as easily as men bend the laws of their cities. But the message returned to them was iron-bound. There would be no pardon. The watchers would not return to their stations. They would not see the light of the upper heavens again. Instead, they would be bound, not in the simple fetters of earth, but in chains forged from the very fabric of judgment, chains that no key could open, no hand could break. It began with the summoning. The skies above the mountains of the east split open, not with storm, but with the rolling glow of a fire that moved like the tide. The earth trembled not in chaos, but in the steady rhythm of approaching steps, the steps of those who had been appointed for this work since before the rebellion itself. Archangels descended. Michael, the great captain, his form blazing with the authority of unbroken obedience. Raphael, healer of worlds, his countenance both fierce and sorrowful. Gabriel, the herald, whose voice could shake the stars from their courses. And Uriel, the light of God, whose eyes pierced through lies as if they were smoke. They came not as diplomats, nor as soldiers seeking battle, but as executioners of a sentence already sealed. The watchers were gathered in the place appointed. A valley deep and narrow, its walls black as obsidian, its floor veined with rivers of molten light. The air there was thick, as if the weight of the decree had already begun to press upon it. Some of the watchers still carried the echo of their old beauty, their forms radiant, their faces like the sun at dawn. But others were diminished, their wings dulled, their eyes shadowed, their forms bending under an invisible weight. They knew, each of them, that the hour was beyond turning back. Michael stepped forward, his voice neither raised nor softened, but resonating with the certainty of one who speaks not his own words, but the words of the throne itself. You were sent to watch, and you abandoned your watch. You were given honor, and you traded it for desire. You were entrusted with mysteries, and you used them to corrupt. Your dominion is ended. Your place is taken from you. You will be bound in the deep until the day of the great judgment. The valley seemed to contract around them. From the fissures in its walls came chains, not metal, but light condensed into weight and form. Each link shone with the brilliance of stars, yet burned like the heart of a furnace. When they touched the skin of the watchers, the sound was like the hiss of 1,000 oceans meeting fire. Some resisted, their voices rising in cries that bent the air. Wings flared, eyes blazed, but the chains were not for struggle. They wound themselves around limbs and torsos, through wings and across throats, not with the force of pulling hands, but with the inevitability of a law that has been spoken and cannot be unsaid. Others did not fight. They stood with heads bowed, the light of their forms flickering like lamps at the end of oil. Perhaps they knew that resistance was not courage, only futility. Perhaps they remembered the day they chose to descend, and understood that every moment since had been a step toward this. Uriel spoke, his voice like the crack of lightning over a silent sea. You will dwell in the abyss, in darkness deeper than night, where the weight of your deeds will press upon you without ceasing. You will see the world you have marred cleansed by flood. You will hear the voices of the righteous rise while yours are swallowed in silence. And on the day appointed you will stand, not as watchers, but as witnesses against yourselves. When the judgment is final, at his words, the ground beneath them gave way. The valley split, its floor crumbling into a chasm without bottom. From within came a wind that was not cold, but carried the scent of stillness, the stillness of places that have never seen light. The chains tightened, and the watchers were drawn downward, not falling, but sinking, as if the very earth had been made liquid beneath them. Their cries, for those who cried, did not echo. The walls drank the sound, leaving only the steady hum of the chains as they sank into the dark. Enoch, watching from the edge, felt the pull of that abyss in his own bones. He knew this was no grave, no resting place. It was a prison where time itself could not decay the sentence, where ages would pass like breaths and still the gates would not open. The earth closed above them, sealing the abyss. Where the valley had been, there was now only a plain of black glass, smooth and unbroken. It reflected the sky, but gave no sign of what lay beneath. The archangels turned away, their task complete. They did not look back, for the sentence was not theirs to mourn or question. Above them, the heavens remained as they had been, unshaken, unshattered. For judgment in the courts of the Most High does not disrupt the order, it restores it. But the judgment was not for the watchers alone. The Nephilim, the towering offspring of that forbidden union, still walked the earth. They were not bound by chains of light, for they were flesh, but their days were numbered all the same. Their hunger had drained the land, their violence had soaked the soil. The flood was coming, a cleansing so complete that their very bones would be scattered into mud, their names dissolved into myth. And yet, even in destruction, their shadow would remain. Stories of giants, of great kings and godlike warriors would echo in the oral histories of tribes scattered across the continents. Monuments of impossible stone would bear silent witness to hands too large for any living man. In every age there would be whispers that once the sons of heaven had walked among men, and the world had never fully recovered. Enoch returned from that valley, knowing the end of an age was upon the earth. The rains had not yet begun, the ark was not yet sealed, but the sentence had been passed, and in the halls of eternity, that is as good as done. He carried the record, not for the watchers, who could no longer hear it, but for the generations that would follow, so they might know that the heavens do not forget, and that the one who measures the stars also measures the hearts of those who dwell beneath them. And somewhere, far below the surface of the world, in chambers where no light will ever fall, the watchers wait, not in hope, but in the unbroken certainty that the next voice they hear will not be the voice of mercy. They are gone from the earth. At least, that is what the written judgment says. The flood has passed. The valleys have been scrubbed clean. The towers of their bones toppled into mud. And yet, the shadows of the Nephilim stretch across history, cast by ruins and riddles scattered across the continents. Their forms may have dissolved, but their image, whether as gods, giants, or great kings, is etched into the stone memory of civilizations that never knew each other, yet somehow told the same story. If one follows these echoes carefully, from the dust of Mesopotamia to the jagged spines of the Andes, from the green crescents of Polynesia to the wind-swept plains of Africa, a pattern begins to emerge. It is not the pattern of coincidence, nor of cultural borrowing. It is the residue of something older, something global, the kind of mark left by a presence that once walked everywhere, and then nowhere at all. The oldest echoes lie where the rivers of the first kingdoms met. In the baked clay of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians wrote of beings who came down from the heavens. The Anunnaki, tall, radiant, skilled beyond human capacity. They were said to have taught men the ways of kingship, the secrets of metallurgy, the order of the stars. Some of them were benevolent, guiding their chosen cities into prosperity. Others were tyrants demanding blood and worship. Their temples rose like stairways to the skies. The ziggurats, vast, tiered structures aligned with celestial movements, as if they were meant not merely for the worship of the gods, but as markers for those who had once descended from beyond. Even the language of the Sumerians betrays the same imagery found in the tales of Enoch. Watchers from above, divine sons who crossed the boundary between heaven and earth. Far to the west, in the high and thin air of the Andes, stand stones that should not exist. At Sacsayhuaman, the walls are built from blocks so large that modern cranes strain to imagine moving them. Each stone fits with the next in a pattern of angles so precise that even a blade of grass cannot slip between them. There are no records of the tools used, no surviving blueprints, no clear reason why such a feat of over-engineering was necessary. Local legend says these stones were moved by giants, beings who strode across the mountains with loads no human could bear. And they were not alone. The legends of the Inca speak of Viracocha, the great creator god, who came from the sea dressed in white, tall and bearded, his face stern but kind. He was said to have taught the people arts and laws before vanishing again across the waters. His image, though softened by myth, bears the same silhouette as the ancient giants described in far older texts. Sail east from those mountains and you will find the islands, scattered like green jewels across the endless Pacific. Here, too, the earth remembers. On Easter Island, the Moai stand in silent ranks, their faces long and severe, their bodies buried deep beneath the ground. Each is carved from volcanic rock, hauled across the island from a single quarry, a task that would break modern machines. And yet, somehow, they were moved. The islanders say that the statues walked. Not in the literal sense, perhaps, but they speak of a time when powerful beings, long-limbed, towering, not wholly human, came to the island and left their likeness behind. In Polynesian myth, these were not gods in the abstract sense, but ancestors, flesh and blood figures whose size and skill separated them from all others. Travel to Africa, and the same shadows fall. In the lands of the Dogon, an isolated people of Mali, there is a story of beings who came from the sky in a great vessel, teaching them the patterns of the stars, including details about Sirius, the dog star, that modern science only confirmed in the 20th century. They speak of Nomo, amphibious, shining, with knowledge of the deep waters and the heavens. Though the form shifts, the core remains the same, visitors of impossible stature and wisdom, arriving from above, leaving transformation in their wake. To the south, among the Zulu, there are tales of the Shatori, children of the serpent, beings of power who descended and intermingled with humans. They brought gifts of metal and war, but also dominion and control. Their blood ran in the veins of certain kings, and their memory lingered in the songs of warriors. Even in the frozen expanse of the far north, where night and day can last months, the echoes continue. Among the Norse, the frost giants, the Jotnar, were said to be older than the gods themselves, vast beings of primal force who shaped the land in their battles. They were not all enemies, some mingled with the Aesir, producing offspring who were half divine, half giant. In their sagas, one can hear the distant thunder of the same ancient patterns, beings from beyond mingling with those of earth, bringing both gifts and ruin. These legends, scattered and varied, might be dismissed as the natural product of human imagination. But the ruins complicate the dismissal. In nearly every place where the stories live, there stand monuments whose scale defies the supposed technology of the culture that built them. The Trelithons of Baalbek, stones weighing more than 1,000 tons each. The Cyclopean walls of Mycenae, named for the one-eyed giant said to have built them. The step pyramids of Mesoamerica, echoing the form and function of the ziggurats thousands of miles away. It is not just the size, but the precision. Angles that hold without mortar. Stones carved with surfaces so flat they might have been machined. Alignments that match the solstices, equinoxes, and even the precession of the equinoxes. A cycle spanning nearly 26,000 years. How did such knowledge survive in cultures that, according to the conventional timeline, had only recently learned to work bronze? Some say the answer is simple: it didn't survive. It was given. Given by those who had it from the beginning. The same beings remembered as the Anunnaki, the Viracocha, the Nomo, the Jotnar. The same beings the Book of Enoch calls the Watchers. The same whose offspring were cast into the role of gods, kings, or monsters depending on the storyteller. If this is true, Then the judgment of the Watchers did not erase their influence, it only buried it. Like seeds dropped in every corner of the world, their legacy germinated in myth, in architecture, in the faint but persistent memory that mankind was once taught by something not quite human. And so, across the world, the echoes remain. Tourists stand before the stones, marveling at the skill of primitive builders. Scholars debate, measure, hypothesize. Locals tell the old stories, sometimes with pride, sometimes with warning. But the pattern, the unmistakable pattern, is still there. Giants who came from the sky, knowledge beyond the age, a sudden disappearance, and the lingering shadow of their works, whispering from every continent that the age before the flood was not empty, but crowded with powers we can barely imagine. It began with a voice, not the kind that strikes the ear, but the kind that seems to move inside the chest, as if the bones themselves were listening. It called his name, once, and the world shifted. Enoch had walked among men all his life, the seventh generation from Adam, known for his righteousness, his strange, quiet wisdom. But now, the earth around him seemed to fall away, as though he had stepped out of the weight of gravity itself. The air grew light and sharp, shimmering with an unseen light that was felt more than seen, and in that moment he understood. He had been summoned. The ground beneath him dissolved into brilliance, and he was lifted, not by wind, not by wings, but by something deeper, a current of command that moved through the very structure of reality. The sky opened like a veil drawn aside, revealing layers upon layers of existence he had never imagined. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not emptiness, but a deep, resonant stillness, the kind that swallows every thought and replaces it with awe. Beneath him, the earth curled into its horizons, the rivers like silver threads, the mountains like the bones of sleeping titans. Above, the expanse was alive, not empty, but filled with movement, wheels within wheels, eyes within light, flames that burned but did not consume. Two figures approached, their forms human yet impossibly perfect, radiant as if carved from living light. They were not the Watchers who had descended. These were of a purer order, messengers of the Most High. Their faces were calm, yet carried the weight of 1,000 storms, and when they spoke, their voices moved like the harmony of many waters. "Do not fear, Enoch," one said. "You have been chosen to see the realms beyond, to witness the order of all things, and to return with the record of what you behold. Your days among men are not yet ended, but your eyes will see what no mortal has beheld and lived." They took him by the hands that felt both solid and like flowing fire, and together they rose. The stars did not drift past. Instead, the very fabric of the sky seemed to unfold before them, like an ancient scroll revealing one scene after another. The first realm they entered was unlike any landscape Enoch had known. It glowed with a golden light that seemed to breathe, pulsing in slow, steady rhythm. Structures like crystal mountains rose from a ground that was not stone, but something translucent, alive, humming with the same song as the air. Rivers of living water coursed through the land, each drop shining with its own inner spark, as if the water carried memory itself. Here, angelic beings moved like dancers in a perfect pattern, their steps leaving traces of light that lingered for moments before fading back into the air. They greeted him without words, but the greeting was complete, a warmth that filled him from the inside. From there, they passed upward, not as one climbs, but as one steps through a threshold into a higher vibration of reality. The second realm was vaster still, its horizon unreachable, filled with thrones of fire and voices that sang the very structure of the cosmos into being. Here, Enoch saw the storehouses of the elements, the vaults where the snow was kept, the chambers of the winds, the fountains of rain. Great doors of immeasurable size swung open at the command of unseen powers, releasing their treasures to the earth below in appointed seasons. It was here he understood. Nothing in creation was accidental. Every drop of water, every breath of air, every flicker of starlight moved according to design. In the third realm, the light was softer, tinged with the blue of twilight. Here he saw souls, countless souls moving like a tide. Some glowed with joy, their forms light and quick, rising upward toward places unseen. Others seemed dim, heavy, their movement sluggish, pulled downward into shadows. He was told these were the souls of men awaiting their judgment, the righteous resting in peace, the wicket in chains of darkness until the appointed day. Enoch's heart ached at the sight, for he saw faces he recognized, and many more he did not. He wanted to reach out, to speak, but the messengers at his side placed a hand upon his shoulder and said only, "This is not yet your dwelling. You are here to witness, not to remain." Beyond this, the realms grew stranger still. He was taken into a place where time itself seemed to bend, where past and future folded into a single moment, like many rivers meeting in a single pool. Here, the walls were made of something that looked like glass and fire at once, and in them he could see events unfolding, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the birth and death of stars, the judgment of angels, and the renewal of the earth. He saw the watchers, those who had abandoned their posts, their faces twisted with pride and sorrow, bound in chains that burned yet did not consume. They cried out to him, not in repentance but in desperation, begging him to carry their petitions to the throne of the Most High. The messengers led him onward, and there, high above all other realms, he came into a place of such brilliance that he could scarcely stand. The throne of the Most High was not a seat but a reality unto itself, a place where all creation seemed to converge, where light and sound and meaning were one and the same. From here, the currents of all existence flowed outward, sustaining the stars, the earth, and every living thing. Around it moved beings of impossible form, some like pillars of fire, others like rivers of lightning, their voices weaving together in a song that had no beginning and would have no end. It was here that Enoch was given the visions in full, the cycles of the heavens, the appointed times of the earth, the secrets of the calendar, and the measure of days. He saw the movements of the sun and moon, their paths across the sky, the lengths of their circuits, the gates through which they rose and set. He was shown how the seasons were marked, how the years turned in great cycles, and how the appointed times of judgment were fixed before the foundations of the world. The voice of the Most High spoke, and it was like the breaking of oceans and the gentleness of rain in the same breath. "Enoch, son of Jared, you will return to your people with this knowledge. You will write what you have seen and heard, for these are the records of the truth. You will warn the righteous to remain steadfast, for the days will come when the powers of heaven and earth will be shaken. You will declare to the watchers that their judgment is sealed, their return to the heights denied, their place in the pit appointed until the end of days, and you will tell men that nothing escapes the measure of time I have set." When the vision ended, Enoch felt himself descending, not falling, but being carried gently, like a leaf on a calm stream. The earth rose to meet him, its colors rich and heavy after the brilliance of the realms above. The air was thicker, the sound of wind and water louder than he remembered. He stood once more among the fields he had known, yet he knew he would never see them the same way again. For he had walked the corridors of heaven. He had seen the storehouses of creation, the thrones of judgment, the fates of souls, and the unshakable throne of the Most High. And now he carried the burden of that knowledge, to speak it, to write it, to preserve it for a generation yet to come, a generation that would need to remember that once a man had been taken up and shown the secrets of time. It began in the silence after Enoch's return. The fields seemed still, the rivers moved as they always had, but somewhere beneath the skin of the world there was tension, as if creation itself was holding its breath. The watchers had been judged, their pleas recorded, and their sentence fixed in the unchanging will of the Most High, and now the decree would be carried out. From the high realms where the command was spoken, the order moved like lightning, swift and unrelenting, through the hosts of heaven. No angel dared question it, no power could soften it. For these were not the sins of men. These were the crimes of those who had once stood in the very presence of the Eternal, who had seen his light face to face and turned from it. The watchers had descended to earth, not as humble servants but as kings without a throne, taking for themselves what had not been given, bending the lives of men and women into shapes never meant to be. They had corrupted flesh and spirit alike, teaching forbidden arts, the sharpening of blades for bloodshed, the mixing of herbs for poison, the crafting of enchantments to bind the will of another. They had whispered secrets into the ears of humankind, secrets that unraveled innocence and lured the heart into pride. The offspring of their unions, The Nephilim had walked the earth like living storms, consuming the land and leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. The cries of the oppressed had risen to the heights, and the scales of justice could no longer be swayed by mercy. The place chosen for their imprisonment was not on the face of the earth, nor in the depths of the seas, but in a region apart, a hollow carved out of the deep foundations of creation, where no light could enter and no escape could be made. Its gates were sealed with bindings older than the stars, its walls woven from the very fabric of order itself. This was Dudale, the pit of judgment. Enoch had been shown this place in his visions, a desolate wasteland, jagged and dry, where the wind never ceased its low, mournful howl. The ground was split into vast chasms, each one filled with a darkness so deep it seemed to drink the light. It was there the watchers would be cast, their forms bound in chains not of iron or bronze, but of something far heavier, the chains of the decree, forged by the will of the Most High, unbreakable by any power save his own. The day of their capture came not with the clashing of armies, but with the suddenness of the storm that has already formed before anyone sees it. The faithful ones, those of the higher orders who had not fallen, descended in unbroken ranks, their radiance like a blade cutting through the shadows. They moved with perfect unity, each knowing his place in the work. There were no shouts, no threats, no hesitation. The watchers, once so proud, so certain in their strength, looked up from the cities and high places they had claimed. They knew the hour had come. Some roared in defiance, their voices shaking the air, trying to call the Nephilim to their side. But the Nephilim, though mighty, were bound by mortal life, and could not stand against the brightness of the host. Others among the watchers tried to flee, vanishing into the farthest reaches of the mountains, plunging into the depths of the earth, hiding in the roots of the seas. But there was no corner of creation beyond the reach of the command. Enoch, standing at the edge of a high valley, saw them taken. He watched as one by one their wings, not feathers but extensions of their very essence, were bound and folded in upon themselves, their light dimming as though a veil had been drawn over their being. Chains living with a strange, cold fire, wrapped around their arms and legs, pulling them toward the gaping mouths of the chasms. Some wept in silence, their faces turned downward, while others cursed with such venom that the very air around them seemed to darken. But none could resist. They were carried to Dudale, through corridors of rock that narrowed until no being could pass save those who were appointed to deliver them. The walls here glistened with something like obsidian, and the air was thick and still, the silence broken only by the echo of their footsteps. At the heart of Dudale, the chasm yawned, a wound in the very structure of the world. It descended farther than sight could follow, and from its depths came a heat not of flame, but of something older, a pressure that seemed to crush sound itself. Here the watchers were cast down. They fell, not as leaves drift from the branch, but as stones hurled into the depths, each vanishing into the dark with a final, echoing crash. The chains clanged once against the unseen floor, and then there was nothing. Only the stillness of a prison that would hold until the appointed time of release, which would not come until the end of days. The gates were sealed. They were not made of wood or metal, but of command. The pure, unalterable will of the Eternal, spoken once and never needing to be spoken again. Around them, guardians took their stations, beings of such vast presence that even the memory of rebellion shrank away in their light. Enoch was told to record all of it, every detail, for the generations to come, to write how the mighty had been humbled, how the corrupters of men had been themselves bound, how their kingdoms had fallen into dust. He was told to remind men that there is no height from which one cannot fall, no power that can stand against the justice of the one who measures the stars. In the visions that followed, he saw the watchers in their prison, sitting in silence, their eyes turned upward toward a sky they could no longer see. Some sat motionless, as if the weight of their judgment had hollowed them out entirely. Others paced the narrow confines of their chains, their thoughts moving in endless circles, replaying the moments when they could have turned back but did not. And though their prison was far removed from the world of men, their influence was not wholly erased. The teachings they had scattered among humankind still lived in the hearts of some, like embers waiting for a careless breath to fan them into flame. But for the watchers themselves, there would be no more wandering the earth, no more walking among men as gods in disguise. Their days of glory had ended. They had traded the brightness of heaven for the silence of the pit, the companionship of the Most High for the company of their own regret. Enoch closed the scroll, his hand lingering on the last line. He knew this was not the end of their story, for the visions had shown him a time when the pit would open, when the bound would be loosed, and the earth would again feel the shadow of their presence. But that time was far off. For now, the chains held, and the earth was free of their dominion. And somewhere deep beneath the stillness of the land, in a place no living man could reach, the watchers sat in the dark, waiting for a dawn that would never come until the end of all things. It begins in the silence before the great reckoning. The chains have been set. The watchers have been sealed in the pit of Dudale, and for a moment the earth lies still, as though it dares not move in the shadow of what is to come. But judgment is not merely imprisonment. Judgment is the closing of a story that began in pride, the final word written in a book that has been inked with rebellion. The watcher's fate was decided long before the sentence was carried out. From the moment they stepped down upon the mountain and swore their oath to take the daughters of men, their course was set toward this moment. They had abandoned their posts, corrupted the work of creation, and taken the wisdom of heaven, meant for life, and twisted it toward dominion and death. No plea, no offering, no whispered bargain could change the outcome now. Enoch had seen it in his visions, a tribunal not of earthly judges, but of powers and thrones before which the whole of creation seemed to bow. There was no room for argument here. The evidence was written into the bones of the earth, the ruins of cities drowned in the flood of the Nephilim's hunger, the songs of mourning carried through the generations, the scars left upon the soul of humanity. The court was not a place but a moment, a convergence of time and eternity. Around it stood the hosts of heaven, rank upon rank, stretching beyond sight. The light that filled this space was not the light of the sun or stars, but a radiance that seemed to come from the very truth of things, exposing all that was hidden. The Most High did not need to speak many words. The sentence was as much a part of creation as the laws that keep the oceans within their shores or the stars in their paths. It was this: they would remain bound until the day when all accounts would be settled, and on that day they would stand again in this court, not to argue, but to hear the final word. Enoch was shown that day. He saw the pit open, not by their will, but by the command of the one they had defied. The watchers rose, their chains gone, but their freedom short-lived. They were not restored to the height they had fallen from. Instead, they were brought into the full weight of their crimes. There was no disguising themselves now. They could not appear as men of great stature or spirits clothed in light. They stood as they truly were, marred by their rebellion, diminished by the long centuries of imprisonment. Their glory turned to ash. The multitudes looked upon them, and there was no fear, only the recognition of justice. The nations, the spirits of the righteous, even the very earth itself seemed to testify against them. Every tree that had been felled to build their temples of blood, every stone that had been set to mark their false dominion, every drop of human sorrow they had caused, all of it spoke in that place. Then came the decree. It was not shouted. It did not need to be. It was spoken once, and the sound of it was enough to shake the pillars of creation. The watchers, and with them the Nephilim who had long since passed from the world of flesh, would be cast into the place, prepared not for man, but for those who had warred against the will of the Eternal from before the shaping of the world, the lake of fire. Enoch saw it as a vast expanse without horizon, a place where even time seemed to come apart. It burned, yet the flame was not of this earth. It was a consuming fire that did not give light, only an unending awareness of separation, the ultimate exile from the presence they had once known so well. The watchers were not dragged, they walked, compelled not by force but by the inevitability of the sentence. It was as though the whole of creation was moving in one direction, and they could not turn aside. The hosts of heaven formed a corridor, their faces solemn, their eyes steady. There was no triumph in them, no gloating, only the terrible gravity of what justice required. The lake roared as they approached. Its sound was not like water or wind, but like the low, endless murmur of something ancient and alive, a thing that had been waiting since the first rebellion for this moment. When they reached the edge, they did not look back. Perhaps they knew there was nothing left to see. Perhaps they could not bear to face what they had abandoned. One by one, they stepped forward and were gone. Enoch was told that this fate was final. There would be no return, no hidden loophole in the decree. The watchers who had once walked in the courts of heaven would never again hear the songs of the morning stars or feel the warmth of the presence they had fled. They would be a warning written into the fabric of history, a shadow that would fall across every generation's choice between obedience and pride. The earth, too, would feel the release. The last threads of their influence would be burned away, the false wisdom they had scattered among men dissolved like mist in the sun. But the memory would remain, carried in the stories of the elders, in the ruins left standing in the deserts, in the patterns written in the stars that only the wise would read. When Enoch awoke from this vision, he wrote until his hands ached. He recorded every word, every image, not to glorify the fall of the watchers, but to remind those who would come after that no height is so great it cannot be brought low, and no darkness so deep it cannot be judged. And when his task was done, he sat in the quiet, listening to the wind move over the hills. Somewhere far beneath his feet, the gates of Dudale still stood, and beyond them the pit still held its prisoners. But he knew that one day, the silence there would break, not for another rebellion, but for the sound of chains giving way to a justice that would not be delayed again. The story of the Watchers was over. But the story of the earth, and of the race they had tried to corrupt, was still being written. And in that story, the lesson of their fall would stand like a watchtower, a silent sentinel against the pride that had once sought to reach higher than heaven itself. The judgment had been carried out. The Watchers were gone, their fate sealed beyond appeal. The earth, for the first time in ages, breathed without the shadow of their direct presence. Yet in the stillness that followed, Enoch's visions did not end. For judgment, though final for the Watchers themselves, was not the end of their influence upon the world. What had been sown in the time before the flood? The seeds of rebellion, the hunger for forbidden knowledge, the blending of realms, had not been fully erased. And what was once planted in the heart of man has a way of lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to rise again. It began with whispers, not in the courts of heaven, nor in the cities of men, but in the cracks between them, in the places where the physical and the spiritual brushed close together. In Enoch's visions, he saw distant futures, the passing of empires like shadows over the land. Each rose with its own banners, its own gods, its own monuments of stone and fire, and yet behind them all moved a familiar rhythm, the old hunger, dressed in new names. The Nephilim, though their bodies had perished in the flood, left behind something more elusive than bone or stone, their imprint upon human ambition. They had taught men to seek power not as stewardship, but as domination, to twist beauty into vanity, wisdom into manipulation, strength into tyranny. Enoch saw that such patterns, once learned, could outlive even those who first carved them into the world. The visions shifted. He stood on the shores of nations he could not name, under skies that held constellations he did not know. He saw great machines that moved without horses, cities that burned with light even in the heart of the night, and people who could speak across vast distances without standing face to face. Yet in the midst of all this wonder, the old pattern stirred again. There were those who, knowingly or not, sought the same bargains the Watchers had once made with themselves. The trading of loyalty for knowledge, the exchange of integrity for influence. Enoch understood that such agreements, even if not sealed with an oath beneath the stars, were echoes of the first great rebellion. And where such agreements were made, the doorways between worlds grew thinner. Then came the darker visions. He saw figures rising in the eyes of the nations, leaders, warriors, visionaries, whose presence seemed larger than life. They commanded not just armies, but the very devotion of the masses, as though they were more than human. And Enoch knew, with a sinking certainty, that some were not entirely of mortal origin. Whether through the survival of ancient bloodlines, the intervention of unseen powers, or the careful shaping of flesh and spirit by means men were not meant to wield. The giants of old were stirring again. They did not always bear the height or the features of the Nephilim as they once walked, but their essence. The restless, insatiable force that sought to bend the world toward itself was the same. Enoch saw ancient symbols returning, hidden in plain sight. They were etched into architecture, woven into the emblems of nations, whispered in the slogans that rallied the hearts of millions. These were not the crude marks of superstition, but the deliberate signs of those who remembered and honored the old order, the age when the sons of heaven walked openly among men. In his visions, the earth itself seemed to react. Storms grew more violent, the seas more restless, the ground trembling as if straining under the weight of what approached. The skies darkened in ways not entirely of weather, and in the shadows of these events, voices spoke in languages long dead, calling for the return of their kings. Then came the most chilling vision. Enoch found himself standing on a vast plain at the edge of a great gathering. It was not a battlefield, not yet, but a place of summoning. Men and women, dressed in garments both ancient and strange, formed a circle so wide he could not see its far side. At the center, a figure knelt, drawing symbols into the earth with a blade of black stone. The lines glowed faintly, as though the ground itself remembered the power they invoked. Above, the sky churned in silence. There was no thunder, no wind, only the weight of expectation pressing down like a hand. Enoch could feel it, the opening of something. A doorway, narrow at first, then widening, and from beyond it came shapes too vast to step fully into the mortal realm, yet reaching through, their presence spilling into the world like smoke through a crack. He saw cities falling not only to war, but to the unraveling of trust and reason, neighbors turning against one another, families divided by unseen hands pulling the strings of fear and pride. And behind it all, he glimpsed the outline of a plan, not chaotic, but precise. The return of the Nephilim was not a sudden invasion, but a long cultivation, a weaving of influence until the world itself cried out for their rule. In this future, humanity's yearning for power and protection became the very snare that drew the old rulers back. Some would welcome them openly, calling them saviors, gods, or the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. Others would resist, but their voices would be scattered, drowned in the tide of a world that had forgotten the lessons of the Watcher's fall. Enoch's heart was heavy, but he was not left without hope, for even in these dark visions, he saw a thread of light running through history. The faithful who remembered, the watchers of a different kind, whose eyes were fixed not on the splendor of giants, but on the promise of the eternal. They were few, scattered across lands and ages, yet they carried in their hearts the knowledge that no power, however great, could stand against the one who had set the boundaries of the earth. This remnant did not seek to match the giants in strength, but to endure them in faith. And in the final vision, Enoch saw them standing in the shadow of a great mountain as the sky split with light. The returning giants faltered, for the light was not of this world, and in it their strength turned to ash. The visions ended, and Enoch awoke in silence. He wrote the warnings as he had before, not knowing how far into the future they would reach, only that they must be spoken. For the return of the Nephilim, whether in flesh or in spirit, would be as much a test of humanity's heart as it was of its strength. And to forget the first rebellion was to invite its echo. The visions faded like smoke on the wind, leaving Enoch in the quiet. The air was still, yet it carried the faint echo of what he had seen, a memory not of the past, but of what could yet come. He stood alone beneath a sky that seemed too vast for one man to hold its secrets, and yet the weight of them pressed upon him as surely as the earth beneath his feet. He thought of the Watchers, once radiant, once glorious, now bound in the deep places, their voices silenced but their legacy alive in the ambitions of men. He thought of the Nephilim, their towering forms washed from the earth, yet their essence moving through the veins of history like a shadow that could not be drowned. And he thought of humanity, forever caught between the pull of the heavens and the lure of the abyss. The stories he had been shown were not for his time alone. They were seeds meant for an age yet to come, an age that would dress the old rebellions in new clothing, an age that would speak of progress and unity while unknowingly reopening the same doors that had once brought ruin. For what had been will be again, and what was done will be done again. This was the nature of the world under the sun, and so he wrote. By lamplight, by dawn's first glow, by the flickering firelight that turned the walls into restless shadows, he set down the visions as they had been given. Not as a scholar recording facts, but as a witness preserving warnings. Every word was chosen with care, for he knew the human heart would forget what it did not see, and he had seen. The pages bore not just prophecy, but the cadence of truth spoken in the language of mystery. He left no map, no dates, no clear instructions, for such things could be twisted by the very forces they warned against. Instead, he left signs, fragments, that the wise might understand when the time came, and the world would know once more what it had chosen to invite. Centuries would pass. The scrolls would change hands, hidden, lost, found again. Kings would lock them away in vaults of stone. Priests would whisper them only in shadowed halls, and scholars would dismiss them as the myths of an older, simpler age. But always, somewhere, the words endured, waiting for eyes willing to see, for ears willing to hear. Even now, the echoes remain. In the ruins buried beneath jungle and sand. In the carvings weathered by wind and rain. In the stories told by elders who do not know why they still remember. And perhaps in the dreams that visit you in the quiet hours, carrying with them images you have never lived, yet somehow recognize. The world turns still. The skies shift from gold to black to gold again. The rivers carve new paths. The mountains rise and fall. Empires come and go, each believing it will be the last to fall. But the deeper truths, the ones written in the bones of the earth and the spirit of man, remain unchanged. The watchers have not been forgotten. The Nephilim have not been erased. And the lines between our world and theirs have never been as solid as we like to believe. Perhaps they will return. Perhaps they already walk among us, not in towering form, but in influence, in the shaping of events we do not see until it is too late. Or perhaps their greatest victory will be to convince us they were never here at all. And so, the question falls to you, the listener. Not as a riddle to be solved, but as a shadow to be recognized. When you hear the stories of giants in forgotten lands, when you see symbols carved where no living hand should reach, when you feel the pull of something older than memory whispering in the dark, will you dismiss it as a dream? Or will you remember the warnings left by a man who walked with God, who saw the beginning and the end, and wrote so that you might not be caught unaware? This has been Mystery Vault. If you've journeyed with us this far, let the story linger in your thoughts. And when you look upon the world tomorrow, see it not only as it is, but as it might yet become. For history, as we have learned, is never just behind us. Sometimes it waits ahead. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind awake. The vault closes, but the mystery remains.